Welcome to the Kingzmen Court. How you doing? I am your host, Real Leo. And yes, took a little break real quick. I had to make sure I reconstruct everything in my computer, make sure all the lights and everything is working properly. Had to process a couple of things in my programs and get everything up and running smoothly so I can have a great transition. I want to thank my last guest that came on, Eli Harold, who is an absolute good friend of mine and is very inspirational to young men out there. I advise you to go check out his Instagram. Also, check out his he has a great fitness program, and I advise you to subscribe to him. Um, hey, it's been a journey. It's been a journey to get here in this moment in time, and I am absolutely glad to be here today. I want to send a shout out to a couple of my friends out there that has been giving me that backative and support, getting this channel really up and running, because the things that we talk about, we never really get to voice it as much on air, even though, you have other people out there talking and saying different things that are great in part. But now I've been, I guess, procrastinating to try to get the program up and running. And now I'm here and I actually want to start and keep the ball rolling. So today we're going to start off with, I'll say, the simple reasons that 90% of men are lost in life. And we're going to try to do, like I told you, this is a male advocacy channel where we focus on men and young men becoming great men. And I want to make sure that we have a crystal clear understanding on the direction we plan to go with this channel and my other channel, which is called The Gentleman's Creed. So without further ado, let's get into it, family.
Well, I'll tell you a couple of strange things that I don't really understand. The first is, when we've done the analysis of the effects of the future authoring program, it has had a differential impact on men, and it's had a particularly differential impact on excluded men. And so that would be non-Western ethnic minority men, majority men who aren't doing very well. So for example, at Mohawk College, the future authoring program had a particularly robust effect on Mohawk College students who were men who hadn't done very well in high school and who hadn't picked a major that had a career destination at its end. So you can imagine those people they have an ambiguous relationship with the idea of education, and they're not oriented specifically towards a goal. They're not very motivated. Now, why did it have a differential effect on men? That's a good question. Well, first of all, the women are doing better. So it might just be a matter of the fact that it does better for people who aren't doing as well, and at the moment, most of them are men. I think that might be part of it, but I don't believe that's all of it. I think that part of the reason that women are doing better is because they're agreeable. And so if a system sets out a structure and says, here's a pathway to attainment, the women won't rebel against that. They'll go along with it. And that's working very well for them at the moment. The men, especially the men on the disagreeable end of the distribution, and there's way more men on the disagreeable end of the distribution than there are women, right? That's what you get from, if you look at overlapping normal distributions. So there's the female distribution for agreeableness, male distribution for agreeableness. Tremendous overlap. Okay, women are higher. All the really agreeable people are women. All the really disagreeable people are men. And maybe the real differences occur at the extremes, right? So, and it's a very interesting side effect of overlapping distribution. People can be mostly the same, but that can still produce radical differences. Disagreeable men won't do anything they don't want to do. They just say, up yours. I'll go home and play video games. I'm not listening to your stupid classes. And why should I work for you? I'll just go have fun. I'll do my own thing. I don't think they're motivated. And so then if you take the men who are like that and you say, okay, what do you want? You can have what you want, but you have to figure out what it is. So then they write down what they want and they think, oh, hey, well, that might be worth having, so maybe I'll put some effort into it. That's what it looks like to me. Now, that's weak evidence, and this is a weak argument, but I'm trying to stretch out my understanding to account for this. But I'll tell you something else that's really weird. I don't understand this either. More than 90% of the people who watch my videos on YouTube are men. Now that's weird, because about 80% of psychology students are women. So that is not what you would expect, right? You'd expect that the majority of them would be women. And you might say, well, it's because of the political stance I've taken. And I thought, well, that's possible. So I went and looked at the demographic data because I have that. Well, before I did any of the political videos, 85% of my viewers were men. So it's actually increased a bit. It's increased by 6%. And that's not trivial, but it was still overwhelmingly men. So that was interesting. I thought, what the hell? Why is that exactly? And then now I've been watching crowds when I've been talking to them. And the crowds that have come to see me in person. This happened at the University of Toronto free speech debate. And I actually noticed it and commented on it before the debate took place because I was talking about intrinsic differences between men and women. And I looked around the room and I thought, hey, 80% of the people in this room are men. So I had all the women stand up and then all the men stand up. I said, look, like, here's a natural experiment. For some reason, 80% of the people who showed up to this are men. Now, everybody thought I was kind of cracked to do that. And it was a risk, but I thought, no, there's something going on here. And then what's interesting now is that every public appearance that I've made that's related to the sort of topics that we're discussing is overwhelmingly men. It's like 85 to 90%. And so I thought, wow, that's weird. Like, what the hell's going on here exactly? And then the other thing I've noticed is that I've been talking a lot to the crowds that I've been talking to, not about rights, but about responsibility, right? What are you doing? You can't have the conversation about rights without the conversation about responsibility because your rights are my responsibility. That's what they are, technically. So you just can't have only half of that discussion. And we're only having half that discussion. And the question is, well, what the hell are you leaving out if you only have that half of the discussion? And the answer is, well, you're leaving out responsibility. And then the question is, well, what are you leaving out if you're leaving out responsibility? And the answer might be, well, maybe you're leaving out the meaning of life. That's what it looks like to me. It's like, here you are, suffering away. What makes it worthwhile? Rights? It's almost impossible to describe how bad an idea that is. Responsibility. That's what gives life meaning. It's like lift a load. Then you can tolerate yourself, right? Because look you're useless, easily hurt, easily killed. Why should you have any self-respect? That's the story of the fall. Pick something up and carry it. Make it heavy enough so that you can think, yeah, well, useless as I am, at least I could move that from there to there. Well, what's really cool about that is that when I talk to these crowds about this, the men's eyes light up. And that's like, I've seen that phenomenon because I've been talking about this mythological material for a long time.
Listen, I agree with Jordan Peterson. Shout out to him anyway. He's doing great work. He's an awesome, very, very awesome individual and a phenomenal psychologist. I would say this, man. When I was in the military, there was so many challenges that I had to overcome. And part of it was because of the lack of discipline that I've had on how to focus on a job. And it was very hard for me to be able to build myself up to be that person that can take on a challenge. And I think a lot of times what helped me was the fact that I knew that there was something there that I had to do and I had to fix. At some point in time, it's going to have to get done whether I like it or not. And I made myself become a lot more challenged, meaning that I made sure that at minimum, I will not give up. It will have to take the life out of me. So it was complex issues. I worked for the finance department. I was in supply, and I also did a lot of strenuous work that were manual labor. And with that being said, those days that I'm down, I think that actually made me feel better to know that there was an assignment that was impossible for me to do at first because it was so complex. And for me to be able to overcome that, to become greater at that part of whatever it is that I was working on, it gave me some kind of self achievement and confidence for me to be able to go on to take on more issues. So every time that a new complexity came about, I started training myself to see it and then try to fix the issue to the best of my ability. And most times, more times than none, I was successful at it, which is the reason why I was favored in my department at times. So yeah, I agree with him on that statement. It's easy for men to put themselves down because, naturally we come with this enabled instinct to want to fix something or to want to do something. So when we feel like it's unachievable and we don't have the proper guidance to help us get there, it's easy to fall into some kind of depression because most men don't become appreciated until they're into their prime, well in their prime, or they're sometimes when they're not even here, so it's a little bit harder for men. And what he said about um, he noticed that there were more men watching than the women who are graduating at a higher rate in psychology. He noticed that more men were watching. Men are disagreeable by nature, but I feel, in my opinion, that we disagree because we want to make sure is that security instinct in us to want to like say no until we can find a true, undoubtful, concrete, factual yes. So I understand that women are more agreeable to be able to accept something because naturally they come with an instinct to be in a more passive position. So it is more acceptable for women, and for men is not so much. But most things can be interchangeable and fixed through time. So I understand. All right, let's get back into it.
I can see when I'm watching crowds, people, their eyebrows lift, their eyes light up because I put something together for them. And that's what mythological stories do. So I'm not taking responsibility for that. That's what the stories do. So I say the story and people go click, 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 and their eyes light up. But this responsibility thing, that's a whole new order of this, is that young men are so hungry for that, it is unbelievable. And one of the things I've been talking to some of the people who've been running for the conservative leadership in Canada, and I've been talking to them about, the difficulties they have communicating with young people, because conservatives, what the hell are they going to sell to young people, right? Because being conservative is something that happens when you're older. They can sell responsibility. No one's selling it. And the thing is, for men, there's nothing but responsibility. I was watching The Simpsons the other day. I watched the first Simpsons episode, and I deconstructed it. And so it's really interesting. So what happens in the first Simpson episode is that it's Christmas, and Homer and Marge are going to buy some Christmas presents, but Homer doesn't get his Christmas bonus. And so he's absolutely crushed by that. And that actually is a recurring theme in The Simpsons, where Homer loses his job or something like that, or can't make enough money. He's completely crushed. Even though he's kind of useless, bumbling, laughing fool of a guy, the thing that gives that show its soul is that he's still oriented towards his family. That's what makes him honorable, is that foolish as he is, he's decided to adopt responsibility for his family and to try to bear that. He's a holy fool. He's not a complete fool. And it's so interesting watching the story because he suffers dreadfully as a consequence of not being able to fulfill his responsibility. Well, that's for men. Women have their sets of responsibilities. They're not the same because they're complicated, because women, of course, have to take primary responsibility for having infants at least, but then also for caring for them. They're structured differently than men for biological necessity, even if it's not a psychological issue, and it's also partly a psychological issue. Women know what they have to do. Men have to figure out what they have to do. And if they have nothing worth living for, then they stay Peter Pan. And why the hell not? Because the alternative to valued responsibility is impulsive, low-class pleasure. And you saw that in the Pinocchio story, right? That's Pleasure Island. Why lift a load if there's nothing in it for you? That's another thing that we're doing to men that's a very bad idea. And to boys. You're pathological and oppressive. Fine then, why the hell am I going to play? If that's the situation, if I get no credit for bearing responsibility, you could bloody well be sure I'm not going to bear any. But then, your life is useless and meaningless, and you're full of self-contempt and nihilism, and that's not good. That's what I think's going on at a deeper level with regards to men needing this direction. A man has to decide that he's going to do something. He has to decide that. Yeah, well, partly what you're trying to do in the future authoring process is say, okay, well, what's your highest value? Right? It's the star. What are you aiming for? You can decide, man.
He's absolutely right. Absolutely right. I had a lot of crossroads in my life, and I did come across a crossroad where I wanted to find some kind of meaning. And I go through that from time to time, even in this day and time, because we evolve. So when we graduate from one state, we try to go to another state and be greater at that state than we were in the last. So, it's we want to we want to be able to feel like we have meaning. I think most people do, but in cases of men, is not as easy because in this society, it could become very oppressive for us, and we don't graduate at a high rate like women do, and it's okay. I mean, I'm not saying that men don't graduate, we do, but if we can find some kind of meaning in our lives, even from a young age, and be able to have a focus or kind of a goal to be able to look towards, then I think we should be all right. Some things are different in our society, tailored to each sex. But for I'm speaking solely on men. We have to find some kind of meaning at some point in our time, and even when we're younger, it has to process in our brain, from older men to give us some kind of a blueprint, and be able to give us a sense of direction. So in that direction, we can either choose to follow the same direction of the person we are looking at as our at the time leader, or we can create our own once we have established that we can find direction. Uh, I I agree with a lot of the things that he says in this, and it touches home in many men that I know, and including myself. So this is the reason why I had built this podcast, so I can be able to pour back into young men and men, grown men, to find some kind of uh, you know, I guess empowerment in themselves, so they can understand that feeling alone sometimes in the things you want to do is okay. But understand you're not alone, because there are other men that are feeling the same way, and they will want to build themselves up. Uh, some men start behind a curveball, but they quickly accelerate based on the fact that they're reaching out to their fellow man that is a positive influence on them, and to sharpen iron sharpening iron. So, I understand. But yeah, let's get back into it some more.
But there's some criteria. It should be good for you. It should be good for you in a way that facilitates you moving forward. Maybe it should be good for you in a way that's also good for the family and the community. It should cover the domain of life. I mean, there's constraints on what you should regard as a value, but within those constraints, you have the choice. You have choice. Well, the thing is that people will carry a heavy load if they get to pick the goddamn load. And they think, well, I won't carry any load. It's like, okay, fine, but then you're like the sled dog that doesn't have a sled to pull. You're just gonna tear pieces out of your own legs because you're bored. People are pack animals. They need to pull against a weight. And that's not true for everyone. It's not true particularly, say, for low conscientious people. I mean, maybe they're open and creative or extroverted and some other things, but for the typical person, they'll eat themselves up unless they have a load. This is why there's such an opiate epidemic among dispossessed, white, middle-aged guys who are unemployed in the US. It's like they lose their job, they're done. They despise themselves. They develop chronic pain syndromes and depression. And the chronic pain is treated with opiates. It's like, that's what we're doing. That's what it looks like to me. And it's so interesting to watch the young men when you talk to them about responsibility. They're so goddamn thrilled about it. It just blows me away. It's like, really? That's the counterculture. Grow the hell up and do something useful. Really? I could do that? Oh, I'm so excited by that idea. No one ever mentioned that before. It's like rights, 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 rights. It's appalling. And I feel that that's deeply felt by the people who are coming out to listen to these sorts of things too. They've had enough of that. And they better have, because it's a non-productive mode of being. Responsibility, man. That's where the meaning in life is.
Facts. Facts.
Shout out to the Motive channel. I suggest you go and subscribe to that channel and see more or less what you can find from there. It's a great channel, man. Like, it's very motivating. I would advise young men to go on there, and like I said, grown men as well. Check out the channel, and there's so many different episodes that gives you a lot of different viewpoints, maybe certain things that could tailor to what you're going through at the moment. I do want to see a time when men are starting to understand their value. And men are consistently losing their sense of direction as we speak. He made a point about when men lose their job, and he particularly pointed out white men. But this happens in Black culture as well. It happens in many cultures, but the main focus in America usually is first white, and then come Black, and the other races come behind that. But you got to think what happened to Black men too when they lose their job. How do they bounce back from that, if they even bounce back at all? what kind of therapy did they get? You know, if they lose their job, they lose their family, you know, things like that happen. I I respect the fact that he gave that example on The Simpsons with Homer, because that makes a lot of sense in many aspects. You know, he was like that baffling fool, but he still was a father. He still went back out there and kept trying, kept trying, kept trying. And I advise any young man out there to just keep trying. And anytime you come across some type of failure, just remember sometimes that is healthy, because you learn from it to become better the next time around, to be, I mean, even more stronger and more positive and more resilient. So, like I said, you know, go ahead and check out that channel, man. And this channel right here is just going to be one of those channels that's going to keep the vibration moving in a positive vibration to the best of the abilities. We're going to go over a lot of different contents. We're going to go over even self-motivating, content, and then also to the sexual value market. If you're trying to look for a counterpart, you're into dating, you want to date someone, the things you should say, how confident you should be, and things to not accept because of your value. That is the most important thing. So, guys, it's been cool rocking with y'all today. This is Kingsmen Court. And until next time, thank you.